In 1963, a Chevrolet engine showed up at Daytona with so much raw speed that NASCAR officials stopped the race season before it even started. The 427 big block wasn't just fast, it was untouchable. Ford couldn't catch it, Chrysler couldn't match it. And when the checkered flag should have dropped, NASCAR changed the rules instead. What made this engine so powerful that the racing officials would rather rewrite their own rule book than let it compete? And why did Chevrolet's greatest racing engine never get the chance to prove what it could do? Let's find out. February 1963, Daytona International Speedway. The morning sun hasn't burned off the Florida fog yet, and already the Chevrolet crews are unloading something nobody's seen before. The engine sits in the bay of a Z11 Impala, valve cover still warm from the transport, and when the crew fires it for the first time, the sound is different, deeper, heavier. The other teams notice immediately. This is the 427 mystery motor, and Chevrolet has kept it so secret that even their own dealers don't know it exists. No advance press releases, no magazine previews, no factory fact sheets. Just 7 race cars and an engine that shouldn't exist according to everything NASCAR thinks it knows about the bow tie brand. Junior Johnson takes the first practice lap. The Impala accelerates out of turn 4 like it's angry, charging down the tri-oval with a fury that has Ford and Chrysler engineers reaching for their stopwatches. When the speed registers, nobody believes it. Johnson just clicked off a lap at over 174 miles per hour in a full-bodied stock car. In 1963, that number is science fiction. The mystery motor is making more than 490 horsepower, maybe more. Nobody from Chevrolet will say exactly how much. What matters is that it's at least 50 horsepower more than anything Ford or Chrysler brought to Florida. And in NASCAR, 50 horsepower is the difference between leading the race and watching it disappear in your mirror. Ford's Galaxies were supposed to dominate 1963. They'd spent the offseason developing their 427 cubic inch FE engine, tuning it, testing it, preparing for total control of the superspeedway season. But now, Junior Johnson is pulling away from them like they're running on 7 cylinders, and suddenly Ford's master plan is collapsing in real time. Johnny Rutherford qualifies a mystery motor Impala on the pole. Junior Johnson locks in second. The top 5 is a Chevrolet Parade, and Ford team managers are on the phone to Dearborn before the sun goes down. The message is simple: we have no chance. But there's something else happening in the Chevrolet garage, something the other teams can't see yet. The mystery motor isn't just fast, it's consistent. It's not overheating, it's not chewing up valve springs, it's not shaking itself apart. This engine was designed from scratch to survive superspeedway racing, and after decades of Chevrolet small blocks exploding under NASCAR stress, that reliability is the real revolution. The 1963 Daytona 500 should have been Chevrolet's coronation. 7 cars entered, all 7 fast enough to win. The bow tie was finally ready to beat Ford and Chrysler at their own big engine game, and they'd done it with an engine so advanced that it made everything else on the grid look old-fashioned. Then NASCAR banned it. Not after the season, not after Daytona. Before the race even started, Bill France called the teams together and delivered the news. The mystery motor wasn't legal. It wasn't available to the public, and any car running it would be disqualified. To understand how this moment became possible, we need to go back to the world that created it. The year was 1955, and NASCAR was becoming the most dangerous marketing war in American business. Chevrolet, Ford, and Chrysler weren't just racing for trophies, they were racing for Monday morning showroom traffic, and every win on Sunday translated directly to sales that counted in the thousands. Chevrolet had introduced the small block V8 in 1955, a compact, lightweight engine that changed American performance. It was brilliant for street cars, quick revving and efficient, perfect for the post-war driver who wanted power without the fuel consumption of the old flathead giants. But NASCAR was different. NASCAR was about sustained high-speed punishment, and the small block, no matter how advanced, couldn't survive 200 laps at wide-open throttle without destroying itself. Ford knew this. They'd been running big displacement FE series engines since the late 1950s, massive V8s with deep crankcase strength and heavy-duty internal parts designed to handle superspeedway abuse. By 1960, Ford's 390 cubic inch engine was winning races, and Chevrolet's 348 cubic inch W Series motor was struggling to keep pace. Chrysler entered the fight in 1960 with something even more radical: the 413 cubic inch wedge motor, and later the 426 max wedge. These were purpose-built race engines, hiding behind factory part numbers, and they were winning races that Chevrolet couldn't even compete in. The small block strategy that worked so well on the street was becoming a weakness on the banking at Daytona and Charlotte. Inside Chevrolet engineering, the frustration was mounting. The small block was their pride, their signature innovation, the engine that made Chevrolet modern. But NASCAR didn't care about being modern. NASCAR cared about cubic inches and durability, and on those terms, Chevrolet was being beaten every weekend. The problem wasn't just pride. General Motors was watching Ford and Chrysler dominate the headlines, and those headlines were turning into real sales. Customers who walked into Ford dealerships specifically because they'd seen a Galaxy win at Darlington. Racing mattered, and Chevrolet was losing. In 1961, General Motors officially pulled out of racing. The Automobile Manufacturers Association racing ban was still in effect, at least on paper, and GM's leadership decided to make a public show of respecting it. No more factory race teams, no more engineer support at the track, no more midnight dyno sessions tuning competition engines. But the AMA ban was a fiction. Everyone knew it. Ford was still racing. Chrysler was still racing. They just weren't admitting it in press releases. And Chevrolet's engineers, watching their brand get destroyed every Sunday, weren't about to sit quietly while the rulebook was ignored by everyone except them. Somewhere deep inside the engineering complex in Warren, Michigan, a small group of Chevrolet designers began working on something unauthorized. A big block V8. Not a distroked truck motor, not a bored-out small block. A completely new engine designed from scratch, built with one purpose: to win at NASCAR, and to do it so decisively that nobody would question Chevrolet's place at the top of American performance. They called it the Mark II Big Block, internal code only, no official model designation, no production plans, nothing in writing that could trace back to a corporate racing program that officially didn't exist. And because General Motors was pretending not to race, the team building this engine had to pretend they weren't building a race engine. The central tension was impossible to hide forever. You can't develop a 427 cubic inch competition motor in secret. Not in a corporation the size of General Motors. Not when the dyno results start showing numbers that make the current production lineup look outdated. The Mark II was coming, and when it arrived, it would force NASCAR, Ford, Chrysler, and Chevrolet's own management to face a question nobody wanted to answer. Who actually controls the rules of stock car racing? The 427 mystery motor was not an evolution, it was a clean sheet revolution, and every dimension of its design reflected lessons learned from watching small blocks fail under NASCAR punishment. The block itself was cast iron, thick-walled, with deep main webbing that tied the crankshaft mounts into a rigid structural cage. Where the small block was designed for lightness and compact packaging, the Mark II Big Block was designed for strength. The deck height was taller, allowing for a longer stroke and bigger bore without hurting piston stability. The result was 427 cubic inches of displacement, the same number Ford and Chrysler were running, but packaged in an architecture that was fundamentally stronger. The cylinder heads used a new valve layout Chevrolet called the porcupine design, named for the way the valves splayed outward at opposing angles from the combustion chamber. This wasn't just creative engineering, it was functional brilliance. By angling the valves, Chevrolet's designers increased airflow into and out of the cylinder without enlarging the ports to the point where low-end torque disappeared. The combustion chamber stayed compact and efficient, but the engine could breathe like a pure race motor at high RPM. According to period tests, the mystery motor was producing nearly 500 horsepower in race trim, using a single 4-barrel carburetor and relatively conservative camshaft timing. That was astounding. Ford's 427 FE, a proven race winner, was making around 430 horsepower with similar equipment. Chrysler's max wedge was in the same range. Chevrolet had found 50 to 70 horsepower that nobody else knew existed, and they'd done it with an engine that had never turned a lap in competition. The crankshaft was forged steel, cross-drilled for oiling, balanced to tolerances that were tighter than anything Chevrolet had used in production engines. The connecting rods were shot-peened and magnafluxed, built to survive sustained loads at 7,000 RPM without flexing or cracking. Every internal part was over-engineered for durability, because Chevrolet had learned the hardest lesson in NASCAR. Speed doesn't matter if the engine doesn't finish. The oiling system was changed to handle high-speed cornering loads. NASCAR racing meant sustained sideways G-forces, and engines that ran fine on the street would starve for oil in the banking, seizing bearings and destroying themselves in seconds. The mystery motor used a deeper oil pan with baffles that kept oil around the pickup no matter how hard the car was cornering, a detail that seems minor until you realize it's the difference between finishing and catastrophic failure. Cooling was equally obsessive. The water passages were enlarged and repositioned to move coolant through the heads faster, preventing hot spots that could cause detonation or head gasket failure. The engine was designed to run at sustained high temperatures without losing power or reliability, and that thermal stability was something the small block could never achieve. The intake manifold was a low-rise aluminum casting designed to fit under NASCAR's hood height restrictions while maximizing plenum volume. More air in the manifold meant better cylinder filling, and better cylinder filling meant more power everywhere in the RPM range. Chevrolet had studied Ford's intake designs and Chrysler's ram tuning experiments, then built something that combined the best of both. But the real genius was in the details nobody could see from the outside. The block casting included mounting points for future parts that didn't exist yet, provisions for different head designs, stronger main caps, oiling modifications. The Mark II wasn't just an engine, it was a platform, a foundation that could be developed and improved for years without redesigning the entire architecture. Chevrolet had built the engine Ford and Chrysler should have been terrified of, and they'd done it in complete secrecy, with no official budget, no public acknowledgement, and no permission from the corporate leadership that had supposedly banned them from racing 2 years earlier. But every revolution has its breaking point, and this one was about to face its own. The Daytona test sessions in February 1963 were supposed to be routine. Teams showed up, ran their cars, collected data, and went home to prepare for speed weeks. Instead, the mystery motor turned Daytona into a political crisis that threatened to tear NASCAR apart. Ford arrived in Florida expecting to dominate. They'd invested millions in their 427FE program, supporting factory teams, subsidizing independent racers, building engines specifically for NASCAR homologation. The 1963 season was supposed to be their victory lap after years of development. Then Chevrolet showed up with an engine nobody had seen, nobody had tested, and nobody could match. The first response from Ford was disbelief, then anger, then panic. Ford team managers demanded to know where Chevrolet had been hiding this engine, how it had been developed, and most importantly, whether it met NASCAR's homologation rules. Those rules stated clearly that any engine used in competition had to be available for public sale in production vehicles. The mystery motor wasn't in any Chevrolet catalog. It wasn't offered in any dealership. It existed only in race cars, which meant, by NASCAR's own regulations, it was illegal. Bill France, NASCAR's founder and iron-fisted ruler, was in an impossible position. If he allowed the mystery motor to race, Ford would pull out of NASCAR entirely, taking their factory support, their sponsorship money, and their massive fan base with them. Ford had made that threat before, and everyone knew they weren't bluffing. But if France banned the mystery motor, he'd be admitting that NASCAR's homologation rules were flexible, enforced selectively based on politics rather than technical compliance. Chrysler watched the chaos with quiet satisfaction. They'd been fighting the same battle with Ford for years, pushing the boundaries of what qualified as a production engine. And now, Chevrolet had walked into the same trap. Chrysler engineers knew the mystery motor was illegal under the rules as written, but they also knew NASCAR had been selectively enforcing those rules for years, and they weren't about to defend Ford's sudden devotion to regulatory purity. Behind closed doors, the negotiations were brutal. Ford threatened to boycott not just Daytona, but the entire 1963 season. Chevrolet insisted the mystery motor was a legitimate production engine, just not in production yet, a semantic argument that fooled nobody. Bill France knew that whichever decision he made would anger someone powerful enough to damage NASCAR permanently. The breaking point came on February 22, 1963, the day before qualifying for the Daytona 500. France called a meeting with team owners and announced his decision. The mystery motor was banned. Any car running the engine would be disqualified immediately. Chevrolet teams could either swap in legal small blocks or withdraw from the race. Junior Johnson was furious. Johnny Rutherford called it a betrayal. The Chevrolet teams had followed the rules as they understood them, built cars in good faith, and now they were being punished for being too fast. But France's decision was final, and there was no appeal process, no review board, no higher authority. In NASCAR, Bill France was the higher authority. Chevrolet pulled all 7 mystery motor cars from the Daytona 500. They released a brief statement saying they were evaluating their NASCAR participation, corporate language that meant they were considering abandoning stock car racing entirely. Ford won the race with Tiny Lund driving a Galaxy, but the victory felt hollow, a win by disqualification rather than speed. The aftermath was ugly. General Motors, which had been pretending not to race, now had to pretend not to be angry about being banned from racing they weren't supposed to be doing in the first place. The mystery motor disappeared back to Warren, Michigan, locked away in the engineering complex where it had been born. A few engines survived in private collections, smuggled out by engineers who knew they'd built something special and couldn't bear to see it scrapped. For the rest of 1963, Chevrolet stayed away from NASCAR. Ford dominated the season, winning 23 out of 55 races, but the fans knew the truth. The fastest car hadn't been beaten, it had been banned. Could it have survived if the world was ready? If General Motors had officially supported the program, if Bill France had enforced his rules consistently, if Ford had built a better engine instead of threatening a boycott? The questions haunted everyone involved, but the damage was done. The Mystery Motors NASCAR career ended before it began, killed not by mechanical failure or driver error, but by politics, money, and the brutal reality that racing rules are only as strong as the people willing to enforce them. When Chevrolet withdrew from Daytona, the automotive press exploded with coverage. Hot Rod magazine called it the greatest engine that never raced. Car and Driver published a harsh editorial accusing NASCAR of protecting Ford at the expense of genuine competition. Stock Car Racing magazine ran dyno tests showing the mystery motor's power advantage and asked pointed questions about why speed was being punished instead of celebrated. The engineering community understood immediately what had happened. Chevrolet had built a better engine, and instead of being rewarded, they'd been banned. For engineers who spent their careers chasing performance, the lesson was bitter. Sometimes politics matters more than horsepower. Dealers were confused and frustrated. Chevrolet's performance image had been struggling against Ford's total performance marketing campaign, and the mystery motor was supposed to be the answer. Proof that bow-tie engineering could beat anything on the track. Instead, customers heard that Chevrolet had been kicked out of NASCAR, and the perception was that they'd been caught cheating, even though the truth was far more complicated. Ford's victory at Daytona in 1963 gave them exactly what they wanted, proof of dominance. But inside Ford's racing operations, engineers knew they'd dodged a bullet. Internal memos from the period, later made public, showed Ford executives discussing how far behind they were in engine development compared to the mystery motor. One engineer wrote that matching Chevrolet's performance would require starting over from scratch, a process that would take years and millions of dollars. Some of the mystery motors found their way into the hands of privateers who ran match races and drag events outside NASCAR's control. The results were dominant. One engine, installed in a lightweight Chevy 2, ran consistent mid-11-second quarter miles at over 120 miles per hour, numbers that were virtually unbeatable in 1963 street-legal trim. These victories were small consolation for what could have been, but they proved the engine's potential was real. Chevrolet's factory response was silence. General Motors couldn't publicly acknowledge the mystery motor without admitting they'd violated their own racing ban. So the engine simply disappeared from official company history. No press releases, no technical articles, no advertising. The fastest engine Chevrolet had ever built became a non-event, erased from the corporate narrative as if it had never existed. Junior Johnson in later interviews called the mystery motor the most dominant race car I ever drove. He said the power felt endless, that the engine pulled harder at 6,000 RPM than anything else pulled at 4,000, and that if NASCAR had allowed it to race, Chevrolet would have won every superspeedway event in 1963. Those are the words of a driver who knows what winning feels like and who spent the rest of his career wondering what might have been. The contrast between promise and outcome was complete. The mystery motor was supposed to be Chevrolet's return to NASCAR glory, the weapon that would finally beat Ford and Chrysler on their own terms. Instead, It became a cautionary tale about the limits of engineering brilliance when faced with institutional power. By the end of 1963, NASCAR had moved on. The mystery motor was forgotten by everyone except the people who'd seen it run, and Ford's dominance continued unchallenged. Chevrolet stayed away from NASCAR for the rest of the decade, focusing on drag racing and Trans Am, series where technical innovation was encouraged rather than banned. But history has a habit of rediscovering what it once discarded. The mystery motor didn't die at Daytona, it evolved. In 1965, Chevrolet released the Mark IV Big Block, the production version of the engine that had been banned 2 years earlier. It was detuned, civilized, made suitable for street use, but the architecture was unmistakable. The porcupine valve design, the deep deck block, the oiling and cooling systems designed for high-stress operation, the Mark IV was the mystery motor with a corporate badge and a production line, and it changed American performance forever. The 396, 402, and 427 cubic-inch Mark IV engines powered everything from Camaros to Corvettes to full-size Chevelle, and they dominated drag racing throughout the late 1960s. The same engineering that made the mystery motor untouchable at Daytona made the Mark IV virtually unbeatable at the drag strip, and Chevrolet finally got the performance credibility they'd been chasing since 1955. NASCAR eventually allowed big block Chevrolets back into competition, but by then the rules had changed, the engines had been restricted, and the raw speed advantage of the mystery motor was gone. Chevrolet won races, but they never again had the kind of overwhelming superiority they'd shown at Daytona in 1963. The moment had passed. Collectors began hunting for surviving mystery motors in the 1980s and 90s, tracking down engines that had been tucked away in private garages and storage units for decades. A genuine mystery motor became one of the most valuable engines in automotive history, with authenticated examples selling for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The engine that NASCAR banned became the engine collectors would pay almost any price to own. Restoration shops specializing in Chevrolet performance began reverse engineering the mystery motor's design, recreating the original specifications from surviving examples and period documentation. Modern CNC machining and metallurgy made it possible to build mystery motors that were even stronger than the originals, and these recreation engines powered vintage NASCAR tribute cars that ran at historic racing events across the country. Modern NASCAR teams still study the mystery motor when developing new engines. The principles that made it so fast in 1963, airflow optimization, thermal management, internal component strength, are the same principles that matter today, even with fuel injection and computer controls. The mystery motor was 50 years ahead of its time in some ways, and the lessons it taught are still relevant. The rise of electric vehicles and hybrid powertrains has made big block V8s feel like relics. But the mystery motor's legacy isn't about gasoline and cubic inches. It's about the pursuit of performance, the willingness to start over and build something better, the courage to challenge the established order. Those values don't disappear when the fuel changes. Chevrolet's modern performance engines, the LT Series small blocks, and supercharged monsters in the ZR1 Corvette carry the mystery motor's DNA. The obsessive attention to airflow, the focus on durability under extreme conditions, the refusal to accept that good enough is actually good enough. That engineering philosophy started with the Mark II Big Block, and it's still alive inside every Chevrolet that's built to go fast. What was lost in 1963 was time. The mystery motor could have dominated NASCAR for years, reshaping the sport and cementing Chevrolet's reputation as the performance leader in American racing. Instead, those years went to Ford, and Chevrolet spent a generation trying to catch up. The cost of that lost time is impossible to calculate, measured not just in races but in brand identity and market position. What was gained was proof that Chevrolet engineering could compete at the highest level, proof that innovation still mattered in an industry increasingly dominated by marketing and politics, proof that sometimes the fastest car doesn't win, but it's still the fastest car. The sound of that engine wasn't just horsepower, it was defiance cast in aluminum and iron, a declaration that the rules could be rewritten and that speed couldn't be legislated away. Every time a collector fires up a mystery motor today, that sound echoes across more than 60 years, a reminder of what could have been and what almost was. What began as an experiment became a legend long after the factories went quiet. February 1963. Daytona International Speedway. Junior Johnson accelerates out of Turn 4 in a blue and white Impala, the mystery motor howling at full song, and for 25 seconds, nothing else on the track can touch him. In that moment, Chevrolet has everything they've been chasing for 8 years. The fastest engine, the best car, the proof that bow-tie engineering can beat the world. Then the moment ends. The engine is banned. The cars are withdrawn. The dream is over. But what the mystery motor represented, the belief that engineering brilliance should be rewarded rather than punished, never died. It lived on in every big block Chevrolet built for the next 30 years. It survived in the memories of drivers and engineers who saw it run and knew they'd witnessed something extraordinary. It endures today in the collector community, in the restoration shops, in the modern Chevrolet performance engines that still carry its influence. The mystery motor mattered because it proved that the rules of racing, like the rules of physics, can be challenged. NASCAR said no production engine could make 500 horsepower and survive 200 laps at Daytona. Chevrolet built one anyway. NASCAR said the engine was illegal. Chevrolet proved that legality is about politics as much as technical compliance. NASCAR moved on. Chevrolet never forgot. There's a lesson in this story that goes beyond automotive history. Sometimes the best work you'll ever do will be rejected, not because it's flawed, but because it's too good, because it threatens people who benefit from the status quo. The mystery motor was banned because it was dominant, and dominance is only celebrated when it comes from the right team. The engineers who built the mystery motor in secret, knowing they could be fired for violating GM's racing ban, did it anyway because they believed in the work. They believed that speed mattered, that innovation mattered, that building the best engine possible was worth the risk. That belief, more than any horsepower number or lap time, is the mystery motor's real legacy. If you've ever driven or seen one of these engines run, if you've heard the sound of a Mark IV big block at full throttle and felt the history behind it, share your story in the comments. The mystery motor may have been banned from NASCAR, but it was never banned from the people who understand what it represented. What Chevrolet built in 1963 was more than an engine. It was a statement, a declaration that the pursuit of performance couldn't be stopped by rules or politics or threatened boycotts. The mystery motor ran for exactly one practice session before NASCAR said no more. But in that single session, it changed everything. The 427 mystery motor was the fastest engine ever banned from competition, and more than 60 years later, it's still teaching us what happens when engineering ambition collides with institutional power. Sometimes ambition wins, sometimes power wins, and sometimes, as with the mystery motor, both sides lose. And we spend the rest of history wondering what could have been. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.